Today we'll be looking under the hood of my first game release, Combat Search Rescue, and I'll be talking about the thought processes behind its design. Welcome to my devlog. I'm Simon, a senior creative from London's post-production industry who's moved into the world of indie game development. I recently released Combat Search Rescue for the MetaQuest, and now I'm building a technical sequel for release on Steam. It's an evolution of my development skills rather than continuing the story or genre. These devlogs discuss the systems I use and the thinking behind them. So I had this idea about how I would learn game development, and it was to look at the games throughout my life and start with the earliest favourite, make a kind of clone of that, and then once I've done that I'd move on to a later game, and then so on and so on. And by working my way through the history of games, I would also be learning the history through coding as well, because I would start with a simple system of just movement and shooting and destroying and scoring, and then as I move on to the later games, I would have different systems under there, like saving and all that kind of stuff. It's almost like unpacking history, like an archaeologist. So I wanted to start with the first game that really caught my attention, and that was Scramble, released in about 1981. It's a 2D, side-scrolling space shoot-'em-up that didn't really have a story as far as we could tell. And the main reason why Scramble really caught the attention of me and the imaginations of myself and my friends is because of a TV series that was on about the same time called Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica for us was huge. It was just like a space adventure with the spaceships and flying around, shooting and that kind of stuff. And we really thought it was cool. In fact, back then, I think Battlestar Galactica was probably bigger than Star Wars, you see, because Star Wars was a good film, we all liked it, but back then nobody owned VHS copies of it. You could only rent them from the video store or watch it when it was on TV or at the cinema. However, Battlestar Galactica was on every Saturday night. So it was much more accessible to us, and that's why we ended up arguing about who was going to be Starbuck. Now there's a connection between Starbuck in Battlestar Galactica and another really popular TV show from back then, which we also played, which was the A-Team. Dirk Benedict, who played Starbuck, also played the face in the A-Team. So for us, he was like the coolest character, and we all argued about who was going to pretend we were them. But we all wanted to be Starbuck, and we all wanted to fly around in spaceships. And the point where we got the chance to fly around in spaceships was this arcade game at the swimming pool called Scramble. So it was obvious to me that Scramble should be the first game I try and recreate. But there's no point doing a cover version unless you do it better. So I decided to take the idea of a side-scrolling space shoot-'em-up, add a narrative, which as far as we could tell Scramble didn't have, and do it in 3D. I'd still keep the side-scrolling space shooting, but the whole environment would be 3D and give you lots of levels of parallax. And then the icing on the cake for this would be to have it in virtual reality, so you could look around and see all the asteroids around. Now, I put asteroids in the game for two main reasons. One is a nod to the original arcade game, Asteroids, which was famous back then as well, although not as popular for me as Scramble. And the other reason for having asteroids in my game is that when you shoot them, they explode and you can fly through the debris, which is definitely a Battlestar Galactica type thing. I always remember they shoot the baddies, I think they were called Cylons, and when the Cylon spaceships explode, they'd fly through the explosion. That was the coolest. So I definitely had to have things that you could fly through after you blew them up. That was really important. The other idea I had, which I didn't execute yet, is to have it in augmented reality. So I like the idea of being able to just sit in the living room here and have the asteroids float past me and me have a little spaceship. And I don't have access to a Quest 3, so I can't activate the augmented reality feature and test it. But as far as I know, it's going to be a simple thing. Once I get to the point where I can afford the 3, I will implement the augmented reality so that you can just sit in your living room and have everything in front of you flying past. And I think that's going to be the icing on the cake. But it has to get the sales. So if you want to support me, go on over to the Meta Horizon store, buy my game. It's not very expensive. And once I've got a few thousand copies sold, I'll be able to buy the Quest headset and add this as part of the roadmap for its development. I wanted to add a narrative to Scramble because I didn't know what the story was behind it. To me, it was just you flew and you shot things and you just saw how far you'd get before you die. And I'm sure there's an ending, but back then, when we were 10 years old, we never got to the ending. We didn't have enough 10 pences to practice with. Arcade games back then were 10 pence each. And you'd probably get like 50 pence as a 10-year-old for your pocket money to go to when you went swimming. Here's 50 pence. So you'd buy a bag of crisps for 10 pence, you'd buy a drink for 10 pence, and then you put the rest in the arcade machine. So I wanted to add a story. Now, I wanted the story to be something that's relevant to modern day life. So the narrative, which has been kind of really shaved back and made minimal, it hints towards an authoritarian dictatorship. And you are fighting against that. And as you get through the levels, you pick up these scientists, they tell you a bit of information, you learn a little bit of the narrative. And then when you reach the last level, it all makes sense who the bad guy is. Now, I haven't seen anyone stream the game all the way to the end yet, so I'm not going to tell you any more about the narrative because it would be literally would be a spoiler. If I show you the last level, it would spoil the narrative, and I want the people out there to, if they're going to stream it, I want them to reveal that. So yeah, so buy the game and you will know what the story's about. Literally get to the end. The last level explains the whole story and makes all of the other levels make sense, because why are there asteroids and cargo floating in space? So let's take a look inside the game. Let's start by looking at the asteroids level, which is probably level 3 or 4 in the game. But it's the first level I started work on. There are 4 or 5 different types of asteroid. They all take a random amount of hits before they explode. The hit counter is also adjusted by the difficulty level. So when you're on easy level, fewer hits will destroy it. It's still a random number, but it's a smaller random number. And then converse to that, when you choose the hard level, it's a random number, but it's a higher random number. The game really should be played on normal because that's how it was designed. Now, to get all this working, I had to learn how to make an object pool. So I'd already built a version of the game that didn't have the object pool, and the performance was terrible, especially on the games where you would be shooting lots of things and they'd be all exploding. Once they'd all started disappearing from the scene, that kind of destroying the objects, you get a real frame drops there, and the object pool fixed all my frame drops. Literally all of my frame drops were fixed by the object pool. Now, an object pool is where you have a store of objects that you use in the game that you've already loaded into memory at the beginning. So when you see the title sequence of a game, or it says loading or anything like that, that's the object pool doing its job. It's loading all the assets into memory, and they're just sitting there hidden away, waiting to be called upon. So when I say I need an asteroid, it's already there, and all it has to do is just put it into position and turn it on. And then when it gets destroyed, the asteroid gets switched off and swapped with an identical asteroid that's been cut into pieces with physics on them. So they move outwards like that, so it's probably like 10 or 11 parts to it that all float away, and they all slowly disappear. Once they've all disappeared, everything is supposed to reset back into the same shape and go back to the pool, waiting for next time, whenever you start the next game or the next time an asteroid appears in the level. That would turn out to be the part that was the hardest for me in the development. Not the object pool. The object pool was fairly simple, but resetting the physics before it returned to the pool was a real problem. And I did lots of reading. I even asked AI what I should do. And the main problem that I had was whenever I pulled out an asteroid and then shot at it and it blew up, the parts were already exploded or still had velocity, so they'd shoot out really quick instead of how I designed it to happen. And it was kind of random which parts would move or not, because they weren't getting reset properly. So in the end, I had to reset and return the object to the pool over the course of a few fixed frames, which are physics, the frames of physics calculations. So I'd switch off the renderer for each part, then the next physical frame, I would reset their position and their velocities, then wait for another frame before then returning it back to the pool. And it's that waiting for a few fixed frames that ended up fixing the problem that I had. So that was a good learning curve. I had no idea about object pools before I started. That was the main thing I learned, and there were lots of lessons in that. So let's have a look at the spaceship. Let's start with that. That was the first model I made. I did that in 3ds Max, which is the main 3D package I use. I knocked that up in like 5 minutes and then popped it into Substance Painter, dragged a couple of substance materials onto it, and that was it. And I always intended to come back and redesign the spaceship. And there's a reason it never got redesigned. That is the original temporary spaceship, and it just ended up staying in there because my 3ds Max license ran out, and as a independent creative, it's death by subscriptions at the moment. For instance, 3 years ago, I spent £7,000 in 1 year on subscriptions for pieces of software like 3ds Max, the V-Ray renderer, Substance Painter, Adobe Suite, and then there was all the other things. I had clients, so I needed to pay for WeTransfer. There was accountancy software, all added up, £7,000. Can you believe that? You could live on £7,000. So when the 3ds Max license ran out, I was like, no. It's just everything's too expensive at the moment. I've got to be really selective and strategic about when I relicense pieces of software. So I didn't bother. I just left that in because it wasn't worth a 1 year subscription just to change a model of a spaceship. The asteroids I created in Blender. Again, I didn't have 3ds Max. Not Blender expert. I know 3ds Max like the back of my hand. Blender. I always seem to find all the limitations whenever I try to do anything. I know lots of people love Blender and do some very good stuff with it, but it's not without limitations. Just like a lot of the free software, there's a lot of limitations in all of it compared to the professional stuff that's been around for a lot longer. So I struggle in Blender, but I made the asteroids in that, textured them in an older version of Substance Painter, which I bought on Steam. So that's still in Steam. I can still use it. There's a lot of features missing from that, and I don't get access to Adobe's material library either. So that's part of the problem. So back to the spaceship, you can see when it gets hit, it's got a shield level and smoke comes out, the particles. I didn't know if Quest would manage particles, but it does it really well, actually. And so I just used lots of particles in my game for fire, the lasers, they're all particles. The smoke, when the ship lands at the end and the steam comes out to replace one level of shield, that's particles. Yeah, the flame at the back of the ship, that's particles. There's a fair amount of particles in it, and they don't seem to have a big hit on performance. The biggest hit to performance is if you don't have the object pool. Loading your objects is a massive hit to performance if you haven't got an object pool. And then also not batching your renders. So all the asteroids work off the same material and they're all batched. So they're less draw calls. So let's have a look at another level. We have cargo containers. They are just, I knocked that up in Blender. Again, that took me longer than it should in Blender. I could have done that in like 2 or 3 minutes in 3ds Max. It's literally just a box with some extrusions on and then unwrapped into the YUV and taken into Substance Painter. That took me all day in Blender. I really struggled. But I like the result. I like how it's shiny. I didn't want a simple object. I wanted it to look really good. But there's not a lot of polys in that. It's mostly done by normal maps. I wanted something that would drop like level ups for your lasers. I used to love that when you'd fly through like an object and you'd get an increase in power in your laser or a new weapon. So I wanted to include that too. I had some really extravagant ideas for that, which I didn't do in the end. A few people on YouTube that have streamed this and reviewed it have mentioned how slow it feels. Once you've destroyed all the blocks, you've got to fly back to your mothership and land on it, and they're saying they wish they could speed that up. Well, that's deliberate. I thought about it too, and I thought it's kind of part of the narrative. The whole idea is you're working to fight against this authoritarian dictatorship somehow. And I wanted it to feel like work, like real life. So the analogy that I'm drawing feels more normal. We all have to go to work. You can't fast forward your working day if you need to. I mean, I enjoy working, so I don't need to. But some people would love to fast forward their working day and get back home quicker. You can't do that in this game. It's got to feel like work. So there's no speeding up. That will change for the sequel. But I'll talk about that in another devlog. Let's have a look at some of the other levels. The first level is the proximity mines. I thought this would be really cool. As you fly close to something, it's like, it's going to explode. It's like, oh no, I like the tension of that. So I made that the first level because you don't have to shoot. There's nothing to shoot in that level. It's all dodging, so you're getting used to the controls. And inside virtual reality, most people will be expecting to be like playing and dancing around the living room. I designed the game to be sat just relaxing and playing it like a computer game, basically. So you use the joysticks and the buttons, and you can use the joystick on either controller and the buttons on either controller to fly and shoot. What I've noticed is all the streamers are streaming on easy level. That first level's harder on the easy level because you fly through the level slower. So you stay closer to the proximity mines longer. So the hot tip is if you want to play the game, get past that first level, just put it on normal and the spaceship flies through the level a lot quicker. And it's quite visual. It sets the tone. I love the kind of how anxious it makes you feel. You're hopeless against them. You can't shoot them. You literally just have to dodge them. And when they're all beeping around you, you really get a good sense of that you're immersed in this 3D environment. And I think this is a great introduction to the game. But like I say, if you're playing on easy level, that's the hardest mode to play that level on. So back to the Battlestar Galactica idea and the enemy and the Cylons. I needed a flying enemy that we could shoot at. No space shooting games any good without being able to shoot at something. And I put these flying objects in. They come from behind you or in front of you or somewhere. You can hear them fly past and then they turn around and they fly back at you. And when you shoot them enough times, they explode, and you can fly through the explosions again in the bits. And because it's all physics-based, if you crash into the debris gets like pushed away, and that's Battlestar Galactica. That's really, really what I wanted. That didn't happen in Scramble, I can tell you, but it does in this. You don't know who the drone ships are. Nobody does until later. It gets revealed to you, and they literally are mindless. They come at you, they don't fly around or target you, they're marching basically, and that's kind of the influence of authoritarian dictatorship again, how their armies are always seen on the news marching, so that's kind of why they fly like that, to emphasise this dictatorship. One of the other things I liked about Scramble was the way the missiles would launch up at you and you'd have to fly around and shoot them and they'd crash. So I've developed that and made that better. There's no point doing a cover version if you're going to copy it exactly. So my missiles are guided missiles, or heat-seeking missiles if you like. And in 3D, they work really nicely. You can only move in 2D, up and down and left and right, but these missiles can fly all around you, and they're real fun to dodge. Quite difficult, actually. Again, that level is easier on the hardest setting because you fly through it quicker and you can avoid them all. On the slowest, I'm not sure you can do it. I can't do it on the slowest, on the easy setting. Normal setting is the way to play this game, I promise you. You'll get the most out of it on normal. So heat-seeking missiles, really straightforward to do in gameplay. They just take off, physics-based movement, and they just always turn towards where you are. And they're slightly slower, so they fly around you a little bit. And then they're set to explode after a lifetime. And that's the bit that gets you normally, is you can dodge them, but you've got to get away from them because they've got an explosion radius that takes life. So that's really good. And then after that's the final level. If you get past those missiles, you're on the final level, and then that's where I think that's the best level, the final one. It's obviously a boss fight. Not telling you any more than that. So let's look at the interface. The interface is very influenced by arcade machines. Now, when I wanted to put the score up, I was like, how am I going to make this work and not ruin my 3D environment? I knew I needed the score because I wanted to kind of replicate that arcade feel. So I thought, what would it be like if you could, as a child, go inside an arcade machine? There were plenty of films about this, and I thought, well, you'd be in the arcade game and it'd be all around you, and the score would be there somewhere too. So that's what I did, is I put it behind the action, way up there, is the score just floating there in 3D. And that's deliberate. I really wanted that to make it feel like you were a child inside an arcade machine. So that's why the heads-up displays in there, and the game over comes really close in front of you. It's at a different level. So all the text is on its own 3D plane. So I really like that. So everything's got a score. When you destroy it, you get some score, and there's a high score table. And I wanted to add this element that removes the old button mashing of arcade games, because I used to see the older kids and they'd be really quick at like shooting that fire button with a constant stream of bullets, and obviously the faster you can shoot, the easier the game is. And I wanted to remove that. I wanted to give people a penalty for being too good at shooting, as a kind of nod back to myself and my childhood friends, like, this is kind of, yeah, we've got your back. So I've put a bullet counter and a bomb counter in the game, which reduces your score. The more bullets you shoot, it's a bullet tax, if you like, which also is part of the narrative of these authoritarian dictatorships. You get taxed for doing your job. So your job is to go out there and shoot these baddies, and you're getting taxed. So the more bombs you use, the more score you lose. I really like that. And no one's really picked up on that. No one's really picked up on that yet. So, but I really like it. I think it's really funny that the fact the better you are, and the more you shoot, the more score is reduced. And I may keep that through as a theme throughout all my games, is bullet tax. The high score table, you can put your name in. I can't remember how many characters it is. It's not many. It's like 8-10 characters maximum, just like the old arcade games. I was going to put 3, but I wanted to put my name in there. Obviously my name's more than 3 letters. So it was designed for the longest word that I wanted to write in the high score table. Just like you'd see back in the 80s in the arcades, people would have their names and you'd see messages people had left, and you couldn't get those messages down. So that's why my name is at the top, and I seriously doubt you'll beat that score. I don't think it's possible. So my name's always going to be number 1. At least one high score table in the world I've got my name on now. So that's fixed that childhood dream. What else did I learn under the hood? First of all, I developed the movement of the ship. And that was just mapping the controller to the ship. It was really pedestrian, really just like the old Scramble, just up, down, left, right. It moves straight away. Eventually, when I got to the refining stage, I put tiny bit of acceleration on that, so it doesn't stop and start instantly with the stick. There's a little bit of a ramp up and a slow down, just to make it feel a bit more modern. I didn't want anyone picking it apart going, oh, you've just mapped it to the stick and it feels rubbish. It was really snappy, but it's still snappy now. But there's a little bit of acceleration. The way I designed the game at the beginning, I always believed that Scramble was just a static screen with you on it, and the background passed, and you just flew up, down, left, right within this square and shot it as it was like a conveyor belt of level. So that's how I built it, and that caused problems because it meant my whole level is constantly moving through the scene and back, which works. It's all physics-based anyway, so it all has to be updated on every physics frame. So there was no problem with that until I started putting in the ground. I did have levels with mountains, and then there was a cavernous level where you had the top and the bottom, and you flew in between, just like on Scramble. But then they had to be physics objects that was moving, and I did it, and then the performance dropped. And what you should do in these situations, which I've done in other development in 3D environments, is you set them all to static. and that reduces the amount of draw that the processor needs to render them, because they're not moving all the time, they're just there. And I couldn't set them to static because the only way I had to push them through the level. So I kind of boxed myself in, and I had to abandon the floor and the ceiling because I just literally wasn't enough performance to push it all through. And the other problem I had with the floor and the ceiling was everything's physics based apart from the main ship that you were flying. That's not physics based at all. And when there was a collision with the mountain, instead of bouncing off the mountain or going over it, you'd fly straight through it. You'd still take a hit, but you'd fly straight through it. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like months ago. All of this work for the last 6 months is now the problem why I can't fix this land at the top and bottom like on Scramble. So that was like, right, that's for the sequel. We will do that again. We're going to make a sequel to this game, put in all the ideas that aren't in the first game, and fix all the problems that I had with the first game, and then develop the idea some more. So that's coming. I've already started. The first line of code has already been typed. So that'll be the next devlog. Where were you going with that? So if you want to support me, here's my shameless plug to the game. Go across to combatsearchrescue.com. That's my website. There's a link on there to the store. I'll put a link to the store in the description at the bottom, wherever the description is. And what you can do is, it's on sale at the moment. If it's not on sale, go back to my website, find the message, send me a message and say, I saw your devlog. You said I could have a discount, and I will send you a coupon or something to get you that discount. So that's the idea, is everybody gets a discount. Crazy world we live in. Thank you for listening. Come back to my next devlog where we'll start looking at the sequel, which isn't developed yet. I'll be logging it, or vlogging it, or blogging it, or whatever, devlogging it, devlogging. Thanks for listening. See you next time.
The mission is not complete. There are more asteroids in our path.